my ninjas. I am Strydent, and I'm back with another review. Today we're taking a look at my figures that I picked up from the Mythic Legions Advent of Decay Kickstarter. So, you guys already know I'm kind of critical, but I do really like this line because I'm a fan of swords and sorcery and knights and all that good stuff. And, you know, one kind of bears, with some tweaking, bears a really nice resemblance to yours truly, as you see in these pictures. So I'm always watching from the the outside, and what always gets on my nerves is the fact that on the secondary market these things go for stupid prices. I mean, they come out at like 25 to 30 bucks and then end up going for 50 to like 300 bucks, and it's like, come on guys. And the materials and the articulation does not really beget that kind of a price. You know what I mean? No butterfly joints. It's honestly, it's outdated articulation. It's just a couple, in some areas it's a step up from Motu, and in others it's several steps behind. And compared to the stuff that I usually collect, it's way behind. You know what I mean? But it's just beautiful, and there's something fun about them, like inherently old school fun about them. So I stick around, pick up one here and there. But ODC got me sold essentially on this Advent of Decay Kickstarter, which I want to say is their fourth wave of figures. And I did not jump on with an all-in, but I got just a handful of figures, just 3 figures that stood out to me, all female, all pretty different sculpts from one another, and I'm going to share with you what I picked up. Now, this is going to be more of a showcase kind of thing, not so much a review, so I'm going to go through and show you everything about the characters, the good, the bad, the ugly, their weapons, their sculpts, etc., and kind of give my final thoughts at the end. So this is going to be a long one, so get something to drink, something to eat, make yourself comfortable, and we are going to discuss these 3 beautiful ladies that you see in front of you. These 3 majestic, badass ladies you see in front of you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about the ladies. So of all the figures that came out in the Advent of Decay Kickstarter or Advent of Decay wave, these 3 kind of caught my attention. Their designs feel the most unique. I mean, with the exception of Heaven's Brand, Gwendolyn, the first one, but they all, especially Hera. Hera stands out for a number of reasons, but their designs work the best to me. Hera is dope because you don't normally see, the voodoo priestess aesthetic. A female knight for Gwendolyn is dope, but you've seen those. Valkyries, we did see that. There was a game called Valkyrie Profile and several sequels in which they explored that mythos, and we got cool designs there. So this is kind of a harkening back to that for me. But in my collection, though I have a lot of female characters for my swords and sorcery area, I do not have a whole lot of like badass, powerful ones that that look like this. I mean, I have Hera, and I have Galadriel, and I have Eowyn, and I have who else? Tila, and I have Huntara. But those are all Motu and Lord of the Rings respectively. I don't have these kinds of archetypes. I didn't have a Valkyrie before. I didn't have a High Priestess with voodoo overtones in her design. I did not have a female knight that's head to toe clad in armor. So, it makes me happy to have these guys. And my favorite of the bunch, you're looking at her right now. And I'm going to go into detail about why she stands out to me so much. But I really dug Valkyrie Profile, just to give you a little bit of background. The design work in that game was phenomenal. So that stuck out in my mind. So when I saw her, my mind went right there. And I'm a fan of Norse myth. Some of it is even featured in my comic. Gwendolyn Heaven's Brand is pretty dope too, but she has some issues. But overall, these ladies stand out in many ways. You know, it's design aesthetics that aren't typically seen with you know, in many lines in general. But they did a good job here, enough to keep me, you know, just enthralled with their designs. But let's go into detail and talk about the individual chicks themselves, the individual ladies. And we'll start with Hera Serpentspire. She is the one that pretty much, by her design alone, got me on board with this. It got me interested, I should say. Looking at her, I was like, you know what? She could have ties to Adwale, who comes from, in my verse, he comes from a village that is renowned for hunting demons. So if she is, you know, the high priestess of an order that is dedicated to stopping, you know, a specific group of demons, here you go. Here's the connection. And I love that sort of thing. That's what I do this for. Stories like this, or elements like this, are what really get me excited about these kind of lines. This is what she comes with. A nice array of weapons and whatnot, and attachments and such, but only a few of them are really functional. I like what she comes with. I'm glad that they gave her some of this stuff. The daggers kind of feel like they're for sacrifice, you know what I mean? One looks like it's a combat blade, the other one looks like it's for sacrifice. You can figure out which is which, but sculpting wise, I mean, it's the Four Horsemen, so you know the sculpt is going to be on point. If we're being honest, 95% of us that are collecting this line, we're here because of their sculpt work. We're here because they do such great sculpt work that you kind of have to give them props. You kind of have to pay attention to what these guys do and give them the credit, you know, where it's due. Because, I mean, just look at it. Every little detail, from the handle to the sheath, it's all done masterfully, because these guys are on a different level. And even when they do what we like to call shorthand, you know, in their designs, it's amazing shorthand. It's pretty much why we're so, you know, into everything they do. It's why everything translates so well. But this dagger looks like a ceremonial dagger. It might be something that would be used in a sacrifice or some kind of ritual, a sacrificial ritual. I don't know. They do talk about Hera being involved in some dark things, excuse me. But I like the design. I think it works. It's not about me liking it. It does translate, just objectively. It translates that feel of being, you know, a fancier dagger than your standard dagger. And then the markings on the sheath kind of give it that extra dimension as well. Her swords, those hook swords, I like them. They look exotic. They look dangerous. They look like they would inflict a lot of pain on somebody if you knew what you were doing. They are a nice departure from the generic ass sword of generic that we see constantly in this line. That broadsword that only a handful of figures can hold. Essentially only the smaller figures that were offered in this particular wave. But the rest of the line so far, they can't hold a broadsword with two hands, which is just silly. But, you know, whatever. It is what it is. But I love these. I mean, simple metallic paint application. The sculpt does all the work. The paint just draws your eye to the handle. But it's really dope looking. And there's a little bit more that it can do, and I'll show you that later. The Sword of Generic. I hate this thing. It looks good. It's well sculpted, but I've seen it so much that I'm just over it, and I would like to see a different variation of a, you know, two-handed broadsword or great sword, whatever. I want to see them go and give us the variations. I get it, you save a lot of money by reusing parts, but I think they need to go one step further, especially for the money, and throw in more broadswords. And I know that in their weapon sets and with certain figures you get them, but I feel like this being the sword that's giving to them, some of these characters have a need for broadswords that have specific design cues. You should incorporate that in their weapon. Hera doesn't seem like a character that would use a broadsword. And here's her weapon belt, or you know, sword belt. And these things are nice, they're helpful, because the characters mostly are not sculpted with areas to hold their weaponry on their person like the Motu classics were. You know me, I'm all about weapon storage, so for me, I need a place for you to put the weapons. Once again, she doesn't strike me as a character that will be walking around with a broadsword, especially a European style broadsword. So the fact that they didn't give her a scimitar, they didn't give her some kind of fancy, you know, long sword, it bothers me because that's a missed opportunity, especially when all the rest of her gear, from the little daggers to her you know, her hook swords to her staff, they're all very design specific for her. You know what I mean? So they could get that out of here. I'm going to give that to someone else. These are the connector pieces for wings, which I think would be pretty dope. I was thinking of using the wings I have from my Create a Superstar figures, but those wings have different connector pieces. They're the same wings, same sculpt and everything, or similar sculpt, similar mechanics, just the wings themselves don't plug into anything. They're actually sitting on a huge hinge. I easily I can say those are the best wings are the ones the Four Horsemen have done thus far. I mean, they were amazing on the DCUC Hawks, and they're amazing on the Creative Superstar. And I'm assuming that once you get them to work on these guys, they're amazing on them too. Although I feel like these connector pieces are a little bit too much. You know, they're huge. They kind of feel like just the idea of having that much plastic sit off the back of the figure, it would throw off the weight of many figures. And if you've seen ODC's extensive coverage of the Mythic Legions line, you'll see that characters that do use these newer connection pieces, like Artemis, she what's her name? Artemis Silvercord. She can't stand without using the wings to hold her up. So it's kind of a missed opportunity for them, you know, in how they chose to incorporate the wings into these figures. But you know, this is what we got for now. So if you have the wings, take advantage. I think some of these mystical, you know, powerful characters could use that. But here she is with her knives. They look beautiful. Here she is with those hook swords. And the thing I dig about the hook swords is they look so intimidating and so, I don't know, just exotic. And I know there are other figures in the wave and in the line that use these things, but I feel like she's a character that if she did ever end up using a weapon, it would probably be something like that. You know what I'm saying? I would have liked them to have made a broadsword that was kind of following this design, you know, with the hooked blade. Not a scimitar, but something like this. Because this just looks like it's up her alley. Now, if she is, and I doubt it, there is something else that these swords can do that if she was the only one who could do it with hers, I'd be like, that's dope. And that's perfect. But I don't see, you know, based on the design or the model of this whole entire line, I don't see her having a very character specific weapon such as swords when she is a mage or yeah, she's a magic user of some sort, a mage, I'm pretty sure, a high priestess, you know. But if you take the bottoms of the swords, you can put them together, and she ends up with this awesome staff blade thing. It's pretty badass. Her staff. Let us talk about her mystical staff. The Staff of Basilia. I don't know if that's what it's called, but if I was naming them, that's what I would call it. The sculpt on this bad boy is dope. It's on a different level. It's real simple. It's a serpent climbing up a spire, hence the name Serpent Spire. The wings aren't on the serpent in this design, they're on the spire itself, and that works really well. The paint is on point. You got all kinds of metallic colors going on, silvers, gold, greens, and blues. It just looks the part. It's kind of boring as you get down further from the top of the spire, but I mean, look how cool she looks with it. And it doesn't really matter what position you have her in. She just looks dope from any angle. But let's talk more about the design itself. Let's get up close and look at her. I'm doing this backwards from how I usually do it. Beautiful face sculpt. All the paint is on point. Look at the spire, or the serpent. It just looks dope. I don't know why I said spire, I guess because of her name. But the detailing on that, it's very reminiscent of Quetzalcoatl, and I love that. If she came in a couple different shades, she could be perfectly, you know, Mayan or Aztec, you know, reminiscent of the Mayans and the Aztecs or something, you know what I mean? Like the fantasy version. But all the design cues on this suit are dope. The paint is nice and clean. Even the areas where it's not super perfect, it still looks great. The metallic green is beautiful. The soft goods is dope too. And let's take a little bit of time to talk about that. The soft goods cloak or lower tunic looks really good. It is transparent in some areas, or translucent I should say. It's not completely see-through, but you know, if the light hits the right way, like you can see here, you can see right through it. But it's thick enough that it's not completely weak. You know, it's not ripping and falling apart. So kudos to them on that. There's her back. You can see all the connection points. And her hair. A lot of detail on the hair. But there are the connection points. You can see you can use the different connectors. But let's look at her hair. That is the very bottom, the tip of her braid, which continues the motif you see all over the costume and on her staff. But this monstrous hair of hers. So ODC warned me when she was on her way to make sure that I heat up the head, heat up the area where the head is, before you apply the actual, connect the actual hair piece to her head. So her head, when she's in the package, is not connected to the hair. The hair is separate. So for whatever reason, the opening will not receive the hair piece itself, that giant peg, unless it's heated and it's allowed to kind of, you know, become malleable, so it can then adhere or shape, you know, take the shape of the, give way to the shape of the peg to allow it to sit properly. And then when it dries and cools down, it will hold perfectly. But the hair is kind of a pain in the ass. I mean, it's two hinges. There's the hinge on the top of the head, and then there's the hinge in the middle. We just passed it a little ways up. And essentially you can turn her hair where you want it to keep it, you know, out of the way. But once again, materials, which I will get into more when I talk about my issues, nitpicks, and, you know, problems and all that stuff. Issues, problems, and nitpicks. But the materials are too heavy. So her hair often gets in the way and causes problems when you're standing her and trying to pose her. But as it is, just as, you know, figure as it stands, it's beautiful stuff. Very well detailed, overly well painted, and, you know, for the most part, you can work with it. Freyja of Deadfall. She is my favorite in the line so far. At first I thought it was going to be Juno, the Crusher, but I didn't pick up Juno, and I really dig her design. Freyja looks like she just stepped right out of a Norse mythology, you know, a painting from Norse mythology. There are design elements on here that work really well. I had to do my own little things. I mean, you see the fur, I removed the fur. I didn't attach the fur actually when I took this picture. I find that the way that the fur attaches is kind of cheap, and it's not my favorite thing. And considering that this is a Kickstarter, considering that you paid, you know, 20 something to 30 something for this figure, I felt like the fur should have been connected, you know. Also, when you think about NECA figures that try to do the same thing, there's really no excuse. But that's one of, and it may be my only gripe with this figure. Her design is just, it's on point. There's just not that much else that you can say. She looks capable, she looks powerful, she looks beautiful at the same time, and it doesn't look like they spent too much time trying to overdo any one thing, because she looks very functional too. She's wearing gear that looks like, you know, what the Valkyries wore. It doesn't look like something removed from that, you know, and I dig that. It feels, I don't want to say authentic, but it does feel authentic, and it adds to the badassery of the character. And I mean, before I even got her, just looking at the design, I had all kinds of ideas of where she fits in. And her backstory reads about or mentions about her coming back, having the ability to resurrect herself. So right there, it's like a Valkyrie in human form. How could you not like that? And then ODC gave me this hammer. So I decided to use this with her because she didn't have an axe and it just looked like something she would, a character like her would use, and it made her feel like a badass. Now, if you want to, you can use, what is it, Frostborn, I think it's called? I can't remember. But the Kratos' axe from God of War. But I'm going to look up his axe's name. I think it's Frostborn. What is it called? God, why do they tell me? The Leviathan axe. That's what it's called. Leviathan. If you want to, you could use it. It looks good with her. It's got enough detail. She holds it well. It's definitely Norse. It's got more detail than the Bjorn that came with that one version of Thor from Marvel Legends. And this looks like it was forged for someone, on purpose with artistic flourishes and such. Whereas Bjorn, I think that's what it's called. I might be saying it wrong. What looks like it was kind of forged on the fly. So let me make sure I'm saying the right thing. Bjorn. That's what it was called, right? But anyway, I dig the design. The design is awesome. Yeah, I was right. Bjorn. Anyway, you could put this with her, but I figure she would fit in better as a character who at some point was like an emissary and she helped other warriors. This will add to her myth because she seems like a character who has been around for a long time, and if this was something that she did, it just adds to her myth. Like I said, it adds to her story. It makes you feel like, hey, this character has seen the shit. And that was where my mind went. A Valkyrie that's in human form that was kind of either stuck on this plane or chose to be down here to take part in the destiny of mankind, as opposed to just bring warriors who have fallen, fighting for whatever they're fighting, up to Valhalla. I mean, it doesn't get much more epic than that, So having her be, a Valkyrie that took a humanoid form, or took her human form and actually said, I'm going to operate down here, either against or, within the grand scheme of things, the way that the hierarchy of the gods and the lesser, mystical beings works. I think that's a cool idea. So maybe she did give Leviathan to Kratos in, a timeline, in a universe or something, Maybe she did team up with others like Conan and some of the other, characters. Thor, shit, she could have teamed up with Thor at some point, Maybe that's how her epic goes. So that's where my mind went. The design lends itself to all that. And that's what I really dig about these kinds of characters, People try to say stuff about the levels of detail kind of forcing you to only use them in certain ways. I just am like, whatever. So let's look at the figure on a whole. So from head to toe, I mean, she's Norse. She is from the frozen north, and she's so badass that wearing the amount of clothes that she's wearing, it doesn't bother her. There is detail from head to toe on this figure. The helmet is masterfully detailed. There's all kinds of design elements and knot work going on throughout this costume, or throughout the helmet. I have her fitted with different wings because these wings don't get in the way when you make her look down or over to the side or whatever. But look at the knotwork on that helmet. My God. Look at the braids and the little rings holding the braids. It's just masterfully done. This time while we're looking at her, I have the fur on so you can see what she is supposed to look like. And it's nice. I mean, the fur looks nice. The way they painted the leather bustier portion of her costume, it looks great. The metallic, the metallic paint and sculpt work on her shoulder pads and her breastplates, they just look good. The fur itself looks really nice. I have more to say about the fur. Her side plates, her side skirts, they look good. They look like they're pieces of armor that could also work with a suit of armor. Her gauntlets look well done. The paint on them are really, really, really clean. The little gems are really well painted all over this figure. Her loincloth, the red matches perfectly with the cape. The belt portion looks really great with the buckles hanging down. The buckles in the back of her boots, the wear and tear that's painted on the leather portions. She just looks on point. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I'm impressed. I'm super impressed. But the wings, I love these wings. These wings came in the Barbarian Builder pack. These were also gifted to me. I like her musculature. There's some subtle airbrushing going on around her collarbone, and it just looks great. Let's talk about her accessories. She doesn't come with many, although you could count possibly the cape and the fur, and as accessories. But this right here, these are the accessories. You've seen the connectors, you've seen the spear before, the broadsword, and the shield. But she has nothing really that oh yeah, you could count the sword belt as an accessory as well. But she has nothing that really, weapon-wise, that really makes her stand out. The cape is striking. With the fur, it's even more striking. That's why I wish that they had it combined. I think hot glue might be necessary. But weapon-wise, she doesn't have anything that separates her from the other characters. So I felt like the Warhammer would be perfect. If I had some of the connector pieces, I would use them, and I'm looking into getting some of that stuff. But she just needed something to make her look the part fully, to make her feel more, badass, and feel like, there's a reason why she will be part of your party. Now, this is not to say that at some point in her career, in her history, she could have been using a sword. Maybe each lifetime she picks up a different weapon and uses it as her signature. But a basic shield and, a broadsword or a long sword, I don't see that being her only weapons, I see her using something that works for how powerful she is, and I think that the Warhammer is perfect. So that's where I went. I think that if you are able to get a hold of one of these, it'd be nice to put that in her hands. For some reason, the Warhammer doesn't have the issues that the Battle Axe does with what it does to the grip of the characters, which to me that makes sense, and that's how you can give them props. That's how it makes the whole thing. It makes everything work a little bit better. You don't have to worry about your figure being somewhat altered because you chose to make them use said weapons. So I dig this look for her. I dig this weapon. I think it adds to her character because the weapon you use does define you. So the fur. The fur could be also considered an accessory because you can display her without it. It tends to shed, and that's not necessarily the best thing. I kind of wish that they gave us a softer kind of fur in which it doesn't shed, because just in the time it took me to put this on, I had shit all over the place. The shield is nice, very well painted, very well sculpted, and the spear also. But I mean, nothing beats this Warhammer. This Warhammer really puts her over as a really tough, badass lady, and it makes her stand out on my shelf and in my collection in general because she's the badass chick with the giant Warhammer. So that is Freyja. Gwendolyn Heavensbrand. She's a pretty cool character, very cool design. It's basic in the sense that she is just a knight from head to toe, and she happens to be female, but she is one of the face characters, and she has an interesting color scheme and a very heroic kind of feel to her, so it helps make her stand out. And I dig the design. I think her background is she's related to Sir Gideon Heavensbrand, and the two of them are kind of like the leaders of the main good guy forces, which are the forces of Aetheron. She's a commander, and she's more of like the Iron Fist. She's the hardcore, member, where Homeboy is more of the tactics and stuff. Her sculpt work is really well done from head to toe. Beautiful figure. This alternate head is what I started with. This is actually the second head in the pack. This is her unmasked, of course, and it's beautiful. They did a really good job. The paint is pretty even. It's a couple bumpy spots, but overall it's really well done. I love when they get the gloss on the eyes and the lips. Her eyes are a little off, but nothing as bad as what I've shown you with some of my Motu figures. She still looks beautiful. They did a good job. So, you know, it's like this face sculpt kind of offsets her gruff, tough personality, you know. But I really, really, really dig it. The hair is really nice, and it's kind of straightforward. It's nothing out of the ordinary. She just happens to have long brown hair. It's not like her hair is doing anything weird. You know what I mean? Anything more like anime-ish. It's very straightforward, very fitting of a commander that's all business. You know what I mean? Even the amount of hair, because sometimes that's a thing that, you know, some sculptors miss or they screw up. She has a good amount of hair with a lot of detail in it, you know, and I think it looks right. Profile looks good. Now with the helmet, this is how she comes in the package. This is the helmet with the visor down. Very good, very well detailed, awesome paint, just like the rest of the figure. And there's not really anything to complain about. She just looks business. She looks like she is ready to get down and dirty, and she just doesn't give a fuck. You know, she's going out into the front lines with no qualms whatsoever. Now the helmet is, it's got a hinge, so you can open it up to reveal her beautiful face. Now this face is just a tad different from the unmasked head, but the eyes are done better on this one than that one. My only piece that I don't really like is this plume. It's beautiful, but it's heavy. Instead of being made of softer or lighter plastics, it's made of very solid, heavy plastic, so it weighs her down. From head to toe, though, like I said, that sculpt, man. Look at the inlays on this armor right here, all that design work going on right down the middle. It's really well done, and you see that pattern show up on other areas on her armor. It shows up on her helmet. It shows up on her the side skirts. It shows up on her boots as well. You'll see, actually it may not be on the boots. Oh, it's on the front flap of her armor. It looks good though. I really like, I guess the pink is there, the purplish color is there, but not the inlay. The detail doesn't stop when you get down to her feet. I mean, it's just a very well detailed figure. They did an awesome job giving you all the details to make her feel like she really is an armored soldier. I mean, like, some of the figures are kind of plain, and this is kind of plain too, but it's not plain enough to not be interesting. You know what I'm saying? They did a really good job. Now, her accessories, she doesn't really come with that much, but I guess depending on what you consider an accessory, she does come with a decent amount, but she's mostly all business. Weapons, that's it, and the alternate head. You could call the weapon belt an accessory. Some people do. It wasn't attached to her in the box, so I guess you could call that an accessory. You have the connector pieces for wings. So if ever something happens to her to make her ascend to become godlike or something, you got wings, and you have the connectors. You can use them. Her swords. Here is the broadsword or the great sword. This came in one of the weapons packs. And then here is the sword of generic next to it, along with the standard longsword. And essentially that's it. I do want to talk a little bit more about the extra head, because that is an extra piece, you know what I'm saying? The extra head kind of gives her a little bit more personality. So if you have her in a setup where she's talking to someone or she's in a tent or something, you can keep the visor down on the helmeted head and then put this head on and have her posed doing whatever it is she's doing. Or if you want to show kind of the softer side of this hardcore character, you have that ability because you have this extra head. So, you know, props to them for giving us that. It's something that I'm glad they've done with many of the figures in this line, period, not just this particular wave from the Kickstarter. They've done it with other characters, and it looks good. She does share the head sculpt with Delphina, I think her name is. She is like a female Templar. with black hair and a more pale complexion. I dig black hair, so you know, Delphina is probably more my speed, but I'm not a fan of the Templars. So, you know, that's why I kind of like went for this figure instead. But it's masterfully done. I really don't have any complaints about the figure. You know, it's like I said before. Um, these figures may miss some certain details, you know, that are updated, you know, in our modern figures. But there's something about these figures, sculpt wise and design wise, that is just fun. You know what I mean? Like old school fun. But now we got to come to the part where I tell you what's up with these figures. What doesn't really work with these figures so far, at least the ones I have, and these are probably indicative of the other figures. So we have new shields. Instead of having the clips that we had on the old shields that went around their wrists and kind of worked well depending on the size of the figure, now we have handles. And these handles are thick handles that the smaller figures that were offered don't hold very well. So that's a no-go for me. I don't like that. They should have done something different. So one of my biggest issue, it's not one of them, it is the issue I have with this line, is issues with engineering. One of the main culprits is the varying widths of the handles of all of the different weapons they have. I mean, every single figure comes with a broadsword, right? The first wave of figures came with the broadsword, which is this large. Well, the long sword, we'll show you that first. The broadsword and a battle axe, as well as a shield or something like that. Most of them came with this. And it was kind of, you know, it's a cool idea. It looks good, but this axe is a problem. The axe handle is too large. These are the handles right here. A result of putting this in their hands is that when you put any other weapon, like the long sword, and note that the Knight builder has a strange kind of floppy build. I mean, I guess because they want to encourage, you know, him being in the background and not being the main character. But look at how this is actually a little bit better, but look at that. You see how over the time I'm messing with it, it's just flopping out of his hand? Now, you try to put the broadsword, and look at the handle for the broadsword. You can clearly see it's a different shape than the handle for the long sword. It's got two different widths right here on the handle, whereas this is a gradual width. It goes from small to large as it gets closer to the hilt. You put this in the Knight builder's hand, and you have the same exact issue. It just flops. Even if you put it up there, it flops. He holds it a little bit better, but it should be secure. You see how it's not fitting in his hand like it should? That bothers me. That's not how swords work. And I have other figures that cost around the same amount of money, and I don't have these issues with them. Another example is, so far I've shown you some varying widths of handles. You got two different ones here. You have this one. I'll try to put them all side by side so you can see that there's a difference. Look at those handles. They're not even about the same size. Then you have this handle. Look at how fat that handle is. Much fatter than both of those, right? Then you have this handle. Look how skinny that handle is. Jesus, what's with the focus? Look how skinny that is. It doesn't even make sense. Then, here's another dagger. Look at how fat the handle is on that. I mean, let's put them in front of one another so you can see what I'm talking about. Look at that. It's really skinny. This one is really skinny, and this one is a lot fatter. This is more in line with all the rest of them, right? You don't have this issue with the spear. Spear is a good length. You don't have this issue with the hook swords. They're a good length as well. But you have, it all stems from this. So the moral of the story is don't use this unless this is the only weapon you want them to use. Now, when it comes to this line, this, I'm going to show you one hand and the other. This is the average opening for their hand. You see how her thumb and her forefinger meet, right? This is what it looks like after she's tried to hold on to the, her staff, which is another of the worst offenders when it comes to this width issue. The point to the bottom of this is thin enough to fit in her hand. You put the thin part in her hand, and as you go up, it gets heavier and heavier and thicker and thicker and thicker until you're at the top of the spire. That stretches out her hands a lot. Another piece of the engineering that sucks is the choice in materials. This staff is very heavy and it's made out of a very thick plastic. So once you get this in her hand and you have her standing, and posed how you want her, if you try to make her raise that thing up, it's going to topple over because her arm doesn't have ratchets in it, so it can't support the weight of the accessory, which is garbage. Her hair is made out of a heavy, vinylish kind of plastic. Heavy, again. The wings on many of the figures from what ODC showed in his reviews, heavy, so the characters don't stand right. Their feet, this is another issue I've had for a long time, and I might just take pictures to get this point across. Actually, let's use the Night Builder to show you, because this is from another line, but this is something that's a problem with most, but I heard that there is a type of shin guard in which this is not a problem, but they fall forward due to their weight and no ratchets in the ankles. So a lot of times you'll leave your figure standing up, you come back, especially Miss Heaven's brand right here. Have her standing up, she just slowly starts leaning forward and boom, she falls over. This plume on the back of her head, or on the top of her helmet actually, heavy solid plastic when it should be made out of the lightweight plastic that was used for this broadsword. This broadsword, or greatsword, has a strange shaped handle that is also problematic. It's not quite as thick as this, as you can see in the picture, but it's really thick up top. So up top it's as thick as this, but as it goes further down it's not. And I get it, that's so you can get the weapon in their hands and then have them hold it. The problem is when it's that thick, stretches out her hands. So as you can see with this hand, big space, whereas with this hand, not as much of a space. So if you don't want to damage their hands, stretch them, or have to heat their hands first, put the weapon in their hands, and then pour cold water over them, you're going to deal with this issue. So they need to engineer their weapons, engineer their figures a little bit better so that we don't have all these issues with all of the damn figures. I don't think that it's necessary for us to have to go through all this to have figures hold their basic ass weapons when, there's Mattel can do that with, basic figures. When freaking, who else? I don't know, any number of companies, Figuarts, coming from Bandai can do it. When, my freaking Aquaman over here, who has only one holding thing hand, he can hold his trident with no problem. Why can't my Mythic Legions? You know what I mean? These guys been in the industry for a very long time, and I'm talking about the Four Horsemen. They know how things work. None of this is new. So that's my big area. Also, the fur on this cape. Couldn't the fur have been connected to the shoulder pads? I'm going to glue them up in there with some hot glue. But they should have already been there. I shouldn't have to do that. Or glue them to the cape and give her a different kind of cape with like a chain that ties around. Just little things, These may sound like nitpicks to some people, but in reality,
I have a whole bunch of Lord of the Rings figures, and you can call them what you want to call them, but I don't have any issues with getting them to do what they're supposed to do. Many of them have the old school Toy Biz open and close, articulated fingers. I don't really like those, but when I put their weapon in their hands, they still hold it. Um, and those figures are at least, what, 10 years old? There's no reason why in 2018 we're getting Kickstarter figures by seasoned veterans of the toy industry in which we're not getting, the kind of attention to detail, a kind of engineering that we should get. And I understand because it's Kickstarter, the safety standards or playability standards are a little bit different, but it's not really an excuse. Strangely enough, the Warhammer, the areas that they grip the Warhammer at do not have the same problem as far as width goes that the Battle Axe has. So I haven't had any issues with her holding other weapons after I've had her hold her Battle Axe. It's just that stupid staff, the mage staff. It's just too thick, and it screws up your chances of ever having her use the other weapons. So I feel like, that was a missed opportunity, and they need to do better in the future. So those are my nitpicks, my issues, problems, and nitpicks.
So unfortunately, they look amazing. They, are easy to play with, but because of some of the engineering or lack of engineering, they're just not, not perfect. But maybe if they could fix some of those issues down the line, this line could be, more in the directions of perfection. But as far as a review goes, I have to point this stuff out. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. So here you go. So I figured it'd be nice to give you guys some comparisons. So you see some Motu females. We got Mara and Shira. And you see that they have aesthetics that are similar. The frames are similar. Their height is similar. The broad shoulders are similar. They're just thick. Star Wars Black Series, you see this is a completely different feel. These are more real, like standard regular women. They're not all buff and huge. We've got the MYP He-Man figures and Funko Magic the Gathering. And you see there's like a in-between with those guys. Got a Mystic Knight of Turnanog and Thundercats figure from the new school, early the 2011 series. Figuarts, Street Fighter figures. Now, you have the musculature, but you don't have the height. So, Figuarts usually run smaller, but these ladies are close, but they've got the muscle tone in the frame, the size. You've got Figuarts Wonder Woman, along with Figma Kamen Rider Femme, or Siren, and or Femme slash Siren. And you can see a huge difference here from Figma, a huge difference, good lord, from Figma to Figuarts, because Wonder Woman is tall. She's not super buff, but she's, healthy. But the Figma is really small. She's got some thickness to her, but she's small. And then here we have Figma that's a little bit bigger. And I wanted to, I love Saber 2.0. It's one of my favorite figures of all time. So I had to put her in here because she's still kind of in the same genre. Just like Wonder Woman is in that genre, even though she is a superhero, she's got kind of that fantasy slant to her design. So you see here, though, even though Saber is wearing, her knight's gear, she is still very much medieval, very much fantasy, just like Wonder Woman. So, here you can see some of the details and the sculpting of those details are done similarly on the Wonder Woman figure, which is more realistic. Like, look at the bodice or bustier portion of both figures. They kind of have that leathery feel to it. And same thing with the loincloth area. So, there's some things that the Horsemen here are doing to make their characters feel a little bit more like in between real world and fantasy, and in between cartoon and super hyper realistic. You look at Saber and you can clearly tell she's an anime character, but the armor looks really clean and really, I don't want to say ceremonial, but just really proper, really functional, and it's not extremely ornate. It's just functional, you know what I mean? It looks like it does what it's supposed to do. It's nice and shiny, and it's not as ornate as these other characters from Mythic Legions. I mean, here's a little detail of it, but you can see that she looks like a knight, but a different kind of knight, you know, possibly royalty, as opposed to Gwendolyn, who looks like infantry, like she'd be out there in the trenches. It doesn't take away from what Saber actually does, because she's like one of the best fighters of all time, but, you know, there's that. But here are two other Figmas, and they're very small, and they're more on the anime side. We have Mizuhara Hazuki in purple, and then we have Asuna in the red and white. One is taller than the other, but you still have like it's different levels of fantasy design. You know, one is more on the sexy side. They both have elements though that put them design-wise in the same area, but when you see them compared to the Mythic Legions look like all business. You know what I mean? Like the sexy time is to a minimum to some degree, and it's where it exists, it's different. You know what I mean? Like when you look at Hera, she's sexy, but in the old Frank Frazetta kind of way. You know what I mean? The old Conan art kind of way. Not in the new school anime fantasy kind of way. Or the new school more sexy fantasy like you see in MMOs and MOBAs and stuff like that. Which has a slant towards, you know, Eastern practices when it comes to, you know, giving characters sex appeal. But I figure just for the sake of, you know, comparison, I would show you as many females as I could grab all at once. So there you go. And now for some extra points about Mythic Legions in general. So there's a debate about whether or not Mythic Legions can stand next to, or you can put other lines that are swords and sorcery next to your Mythic Legions. And the biggest debate is with Motu figures, which I think is stupid considering that the same guys made both. You know what I'm saying? And some of the same elements are there. It's just that these don't go off in the sci-fi area. They stay strictly in the fantasy, the medieval fantasy area. You know, because that's why you have orcs and elves and you know, goblins and, you know, that sort of thing, and barbarians and knights. They don't really go too far off in the sci-fi. They don't even touch sci-fi. So that's the only thing that separates them from Motu. But when you look at the builds, if they were so far off from Motu, would we get something like this? Like, I don't think so. And these aren't even the only two that are throwbacks to your Motu figures. So if the guys creating the shit are trying to show you that these things can easily fit in with your Motu or take the place of your Motu figures, then this argument kind of needs to be put to rest. I've seen a lot of customs that do a good job, you know, harkening back to the Motu figures in general. I mean, look at this one. They literally made Atlas another He-Man, and it works. It doesn't look bad. I mean, yeah, he's smaller than He-Man, but he's got the armor to make up for the lack of size. So I don't really see the need for this comparison that we keep getting, because fantasy is fantasy. You know what I'm saying? And it kind of needs to stop. It's getting old. So another argument or debate is whether or not you can have different figures that are swords and sorcery from other lines be displayed with your Mythic Legions, you know? And I don't think that's even a question. You know, when you have a party in an RPG, though they may have elements of their designs that kind of tie them together, they're supposed to be different. I mean, that's the whole point in having, you know, a human from the human part of that universe, and having, you know, your mage from whatever part of society they come from, and your dwarves and, you know, etc., 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 because that's what makes the whole situation interesting. Now, when it comes to paint jobs on these different figures, you know, one paint job might be different from another one. Like, you can tell when you look at them that, you know, this character looks like it may have been sculpted by a different sculptor slightly. You know, anatomy might be different. You can tell that this person is more sci-fi and less, you know, medieval fantasy, like Zodak. But that doesn't change the fact that, you know, characters like Orko and Zodak, they live in the same world. You know what I'm saying? They inhabit the same universe. It's just more or less, leaning to, one end of the spectrum or the other based on the aesthetics. So, it doesn't make sense to say that they can't be in the same place. Little variations are what make these characters interesting. Now, if you happen to be one of the unfortunate souls that have OCD, then I'm sorry, you're missing out, because segregating and, classifying and keeping everything separate, I mean, it's not really the spirit of how these guys are supposed to be, how they really shine. I mean, granted, everybody collects a little bit differently. Some people put their figures up on a shelf, look at them, and that's it. Some people take them out and play with them, so you can really get a feel for what they do. Um, I was doing that with Lord of the Rings figures, and I did it with He-Man figures, and I'm gonna do it with these guys, and they're all part of the same world. I mean, like, I keep pointing out there are differences, but these guys populate my fantasy world, and I'm just gonna get the most out of them. I think you kind of owe it to yourself to go on an adventure with these guys. You know what I mean? Use them, create an adventure, and see how they play off of one another. Strengths and weaknesses. And I have to be that guy to, kind of explain that how important this is. You know what I mean? This is what the proverbial party is all about. I mean, if you play D&D, if you play any RPGs, if you play, if you watch fantasy films, you know what I mean? These are things that this is just what they do. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not some new concept. It's not some lame, hard to understand concept. It just is what it is, and it's pretty easy to, put this into use. You know what I'm saying? If you really get into what you got, it's really easy to appreciate each of the individuals when you see them side by side, because they all bring different things together, and they all bring different things to the group, and when you see them together, it's more evident. So I don't know. I think you should play with them together, see what they can do, and don't have them segregated. Don't be like, this guy's costume is too different from that guy's costume, so I can't play with them together. Don't be like, in my sword and sorcery area, my medieval area, my fantasy area, don't be like, I can't put these two together because they're from different manufacturers. That's not the point. I mean, you think about when we were kids, all you needed were, two figures, usually a good guy and a bad guy, and you could create whatever, you know. Um, there's no reason why, as an adult, you can't still have that kind of openness to displaying and playing with your figures. I mean, it's kind of weird that people need to talk about this, because I mean, I thought, like, if you play with your figures, this is what you do. But you know, this is what you do. You know, give it a try, see how it works. Looking at like Vitruvian hacks and stuff, it's the same thing. I've got my Spartans with my mage and my knights, and I've got a barbarian, and you know what I mean, and a archer, an elven archer. It's fantasy. This is how you do it, plain and simple. At long last, the bottom line. So, many of you guys have seen these characters. You've seen the various Kickstarters. You've seen some of the awesome images that populate a lot of the various sites on the internet. And you know that these are some awesome ladies. These are awesome figures. I just dipped my feet in here. I think in total I have 5 Mythic Legions figures. I think that's right. Yeah, I have 5 in total. And I mean, I like them, but I like them for different reasons. They're not the best figures, but they look amazing. You know what I mean? Like, you got to give the Four Horsemen credit where credit is due. That is their wheelhouse. That is the thing they do the best. And it's evident right here on these figures. As far as action figures go, I don't necessarily feel like they cannot be played with. They feel durable. I haven't had anything break on any of these guys. So I don't think you can't play with them. I mean, be careful, because, these are kind of... I almost want to say one of a kind, but you can have them uh, replaced if something was to happen. If you just let them know that your figure broke, they'll replace them. But I think that these figures are, the kind of figures that lend themselves to both play and display. So if you display them, you're going to get your money's worth because they're beautiful and they're going to draw attention to them. Sculpt work, the paint work is just on a different level. Um, if you play with them and you choose to display them, same situation. They look amazing and you'll have fun. You can do some things with them. You can't do anything that is specifically them. They don't have better articulation than your Motu figures. Many of your Motu figures, as bulky and huge as they are, they can double hand their swords. And that's important when it comes to swords and sandals. You know what I mean? Like, if you got an axe, if you have a staff or a spear or a broadsword, you should be able to hold it with both hands. And these particular figures from the Advent of Decay Kickstarter, they can double hand their broadswords. Now, the ones from all the previous Kickstarters and previous waves, not so much. They're bigger, they're bulkier, their arms don't come close enough. So that's something to keep in mind. The width of many of the weapons, like I showed you in the problems, issues, and nitpicks area, don't necessarily work as well as they should. When you look at hacks, which is another thing I'm going to compare them to, because this line initially was going to be a 3 3/4 inch line, and they went for the 6-inch scale, which is good. Gives us a few more archetypes to add to our ranks, but hacks stayed at the 3 3/4 inch size, and all the weapons for all of the characters work. No issues, no complaints, nothing. They all work. There's no how do I put this? There's no problems with any of the hacks and how they hold their weapons. All of them hold their weapons. The weapons are measured perfectly to fit in the hands of all the figures, female, male, orc, whatever. You know what I mean? Whereas these guys, it seems like most of the weapons are geared towards bigger figures, and then when they make the handles smaller, they're too small. They can sit there in the person's hand or on the belt, but a lot of times the figures have issues holding things. So those are things that you want to keep in mind with this line. The use of soft goods is nice. The use of different materials like the fur on Freyja's costume, it's pretty nice and it feels good. It doesn't suck. It is on the cheaper side, so you might end up replacing it with some material that you find at the hobby store, or even at the thrift store. You could find a nice piece of fur, take the liner out, cut that piece to fit the same shape as her cape, and there you go. But it's all up to you how you see fit. This same method was kind of what you saw them attempt to get across or mimic when they made King Grayskull's cape in the Motu line, Motu Classics. But, like I said before, there are a lot of similarities to Motu, but these are more on the medieval side, the medieval fantasy side, so there's not any sci-fi elements in these designs, at least not yet. And if this is your thing, you like swords and sandals and shit that looks kind of metal, this is the kind of line that you'll be into. The girls are awesome. They're beautiful. They're strong. They're not oversexed. So they definitely, and they're still beautiful. That's the cool thing. They're still beautiful. In some ways, they're still kind of sexy. So if you need that, and that's something, a box you need checked, it's here. So overall, I do enjoy these figures. They're fun. I'd give them like a solid B plus. You know what I'm saying? They're not perfect. The $50 that they go for on Big Bad Toy Store is probably the cheapest you will find them if you do not take part in the Kickstarter. eBay has them for all kinds of prices, ranging from the $30, $45 range to the like $200 range. So I think Otho at one point was $400. So it all depends on what you can afford and how much you want to wait for what you got, or if you know the right places to check. Um, Personally, I think like a handful of the characters are worth the attention because they stand out and they will be the only use of these parts. If you get a whole bunch of some of these guys, you're going to start seeing the same parts being reused over and over and over, which is kind of the point of the line, you know. But it will, for me, that will get old. So you won't see me getting many of these figures that are the same, you know, many knights and many, you know, orcs. And if I do, it's because I want to build like a legion, you know what I'm saying, or build a little crew. So, with all that being said, these are the Mythic Legions Advent of Decay figures. Gwendolyn Heavensbrand. Actually, in order of appearance in this picture, it's Freyja of Deadfall, or Deadhall, I'm sorry. Hera, Serpent Spire, and lastly, Gwendolyn Heavensbrand. They're pretty cool figures. Definitely worth a look if you can get them for a decent price. I wouldn't go any further than $50. Get them. You won't be sorry. They make nice like bookends to your sword and sorcery area. If you want to add to your, you know, the denizens of Eternia or something, you know what I mean? These guys work. So definitely take a look at them. I think you'll enjoy them. Keep in mind the things that I pointed out and definitely mix them up with your universe, because it's the only way you're going to get a universe. It takes all types, right? So that is it for me. As always, you guys have been great, and peace outside.